Hey everybody, welcome to Watch This with Dennis. And today we've got the typical Saturday live stream, and the focus of today's episode is actually going to be about pet peeves. So I'll be interested in seeing in the chat, for those of you that are watching live, what your personal pet peeves are when it comes to this hobby of watch collecting. And I'll plan to share 5 items of my own that otherwise we wouldn't really have much of a video. So that's going to be the main focus. The only video I've done this week was another live stream that we did last night. And so I had a 3-person panel. In addition to myself, I had Patrick with Pocket Watch Time on, and then Tony from over with Eclectic Gamers podcast. And we went through 31 brands in just over 2 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes, I believe, to be more precise, in terms of ranking them. And actually, I'll go ahead and I'll share you can go and watch the video, as you should, and you should go and follow Patrick if you have not. But let me go ahead and share the results, because I did go ahead and put together a post on the channel that has this summary, because some people don't want to sit through 2 hours and 20 minutes. I understand that. So again, we end up using 4 tiers of rankings because it wasn't just us 3 panelists that got a vote. The live audience also got a vote. So everything was 25%, one for each of the panelists, and then the collective decision of the live audience. And because of the limitations of YouTube, the polling only can have 4 options when it comes to live YouTube polls. So that's why we did this very compressed tier set. If you've ever seen any of these other videos, a lot of people have used this. The site's tier maker, by the way, tiermaker.com. So you've probably seen it all over the place, probably not just with watches. People use it all the time to do rankings. So, but usually we see a much broader scale than what I have given you here. But that made for some interesting discussions. There were multiple times where all of us wanted to do something like a high 3, a low 4, a middling 2. So we ended up with some pretty interesting results that really, without the context of the video, it might be a little bit confusing, because you do see some, I think, some pretty strange things that end up shaking out. Like you have Patek Philippe and Vacheron and Longa all in the great category, but Audemars Piguet is down in the okay. So that's probably a red flag to a lot of people wondering, why did they do that? Well, the video would explain why we did that. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to do. So that is available as a pre-record. Obviously, you can't vote at this point, though you can always go to the post that I've put up on the channel, should you want to share your judgment with how awful you thought our ranking decisions were. So speaking of awful, pet peeves, we all have them. It's something that comes up all the time with watches. And maybe for some context, let me explain a little bit what I mean by a pet peeve. So a pet peeve is something essentially trite, or it just bugs us for no other reason than personality. It's something that we just can't get behind. There may be exceptions to it. There may be hypocrisies involved with pet peeves. They're pet peeves. What triggers them is going to vary from individual to individual, as well as the severity. So what isn't a pet peeve is things like, I don't like broken watches. That's not a pet peeve. If it doesn't work right, that's like a logical, like everyone in theory can understand why you wouldn't like that. Or whereas a pet peeve could be something like, I don't like cases made out of steel. That would be a pet peeve, because they're meant to be most watches are meant to be made out of steel. So they go with them for a reason. So your dislike of that simply comes down to a personality thing. So I'll be interested in seeing in the chat today what your guys' pet peeves are, and we can always discuss, explore, learn more about what those are. But I've gone ahead and I've loaded up some web pages to provide some examples and some context in terms of my own and where I'm at when it comes to the world of pet peeves. So we'll be obviously going over mine, but again, I don't know if we have a full hour's worth of discussion and we have to end it early. That's no problem, because I'm still pretty tired from doing the stream yesterday. But I think it'll give us something to chew on a little bit. I know I've touched on, I think, almost all of these before on this channel. Maybe one I did not. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think you're going to find anything particularly shocking with any of this. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. But before we get started, hello, Patrick. Thanks again for participating on the live stream yesterday. Good morning, Frank. Hope things are going well for you. Good morning, Tuna, or afternoon, I think, out where you are. And thanks for being a 99 Cent Club member, which link in the description below if you're interested in doing that or in participating in the Discord channel. So Tuna Notes or Seiko and their crappy QC. Is that, are we using that as an example of a pet peeve or an example of something that's expected? You could argue either way when it comes to Seiko in particular. And I don't actually, I do have something that's Seiko related. It'll be the second thing we go ahead and touch on. But to get started, I'm like yesterday's live stream, I'm still wearing the Moser because I haven't gotten into the watch box today. So that's, but I have my excuse because I'm in a t-shirt. So it's one of the few times I can actually wear this particular watch. Okay, so let me get the screen share here going. I have to redo it because I was showing you a non-web page earlier. So let us start with this. And this is the specific movement that wronged me, so to speak. But this applies to a lot of the similar vein of movement. And good morning, Kevin. Hope things are going well for you out in Florida. So what my number one pet peeve that I'm going to cover is I do not like really wobbly, noticeable rotors. Obviously, it's like, are they meant to be loud and very physical, like you can really feel them? I don't know if it's a feature, not a bug level of meant to be, but there's nothing inherently wrong with the movements that do this. And the example I've got here on the screen is the H31. This is a movement that Hamilton likes to use. This is a movement I used to own. It's modeled, though, on a very famous line of movements, Valjoux and their 7750s. So in this case, it's a 7753 modification. But anyway, a lot of people are familiar with the 7750 because that Valjoux caliber is extremely common in the affordable spectrum of mechanical chronographs. I hate this movement, not because of its accuracy, not because of the functionality of the chronograph, though I will admit the H31 specifically that I owned had to be serviced twice within a 6-month period. So didn't leave the best taste in my mouth. However, what I'm really focused on is this, the rotor itself. Now, I did not realize this is one of the earliest watches I ever owned when I got into watch collecting. So I didn't know any better. And some of this, you could just say, Dennis, you should have known better. It's your own fault. You were dumb. You didn't do enough research. That's all fair. But that being said, my lesson is now learned, and I will now share it as a pet peeve with everyone. The rotor is unidirectional, so it only winds when it goes in one direction. Again, that's fine. I don't have a pet peeve about that. I've had plenty of unidirectional rotors that don't piss me off. This one pisses me off. And the reason is when it's spinning in the non-winding direction, it is, and I know I've spoken about it before, it is like a helicopter on the wrist. You not only feel it when it's strapped to your arm, you can hear it. At least you can hear it in the Hamilton model. It was a khaki Pioneer, Pilot Pioneer. And actually, we're going to talk about that as my third pet peeve because I got something else that watch is a really good example of me not liking. But so it wobbles. It feels like it wants to fly away. And that watch leaving my collection could not fly away fast enough. And it was, I like aesthetically, watch was great. That way that chronograph can be configured with that caliber, with this caliber, I think very aesthetically pleasing. There's a reason, aside from affordability, that it's used a lot, but extremely, extremely, extremely noticeable. So that sort of, I loosely call it as a pet peeve, rotor wobble. That rotor wobble pisses me off. It's not just the H31. That was the example I gave you. I'll give you another one. I'll give you a higher end one. The brand that does this, Grand Seiko. Grand Seiko with their spring drives. At least that first generation, that the cheapest of their spring drives. I had one of those as well. Very noticeable unidirectional rotor wobble. Very noticeable. Not as bad as my experience with the H31. It was not the reason I ended up getting rid of the watch. However, I did not like it. And so it made it easier when it came time to pare the collection down to get a higher end piece that I ended up on the chopping block because every time I strap it on, If I flick my wrist, I could tell that there was a rotor in it because I could feel it moving. And that is not something I've experienced with most watches, or it has to be very faint. Like I have to really be trying to detect it. Like I don't feel it in this watch right now. And maybe part of this is my first mechanical watch I owned was my Rolex Explorer 2 before I was into watch collecting. And so I just wasn't used to being able to feel the rotor. And so when I got that Hamilton, it was jarring to me. Part of the reason I'm less bitter towards Grand Seiko Spring Drive rotor is I owned that watch after the Hamilton. So comparably, it was a much better wearing experience. However, I still think, especially when you're talking about a watch that I don't remember, it was a lower end one, but it's still a watch that retailed over like $3,500. At that point, I don't think you should have to feel the rotor. I think they could do better. Either they need to mount it in a different way, provide it with some more padding with gaskets. The case back needs to be further away. I don't know the solution. Not my job to know the solution. My job is to know the pet peeve, and that's the pet peeve. So let me go ahead and catch up on the chat before we move on to my second item. We've got Koji. Welcome to the live stream, Koji, and thanks for being a 99 Cent Club member. Not a fan of the Valjoux 7750 either. Are any of you fans of the movement? I don't know if there are people that are quote unquote actually like that module, like fans of it. I know some people that are happy it exists because it presents an affordable option into the world of mechanical chronographs. But the problem is there's stiff competition in that space now because we have Seagull and the old I forget which factory they bought that from, but that movement module that go in all the Seagull chronographs used to be they bought the rights to that from some Swiss company. I don't know if it has the same. I think it's hand wound, so you don't even run into the rotor issue at all, and it's far more affordable, or it's in more affordable watches than Valjoux are. So again, just in the chronograph space, there are options where you can avoid rotors outright. Now, some people are going to want an automatic winding. And so obviously you start to have to really contemplate what you're going to go with, because if you want to jump up into things like an El Primero or something out of Breitling, I mean, the dollar amounts do get significant. So it's, the chronograph space in the lower dollar tier is mostly, there's a lot of Mecha quartz and regular quartz. So that's usually the lower end. So I kind of get why it exists. But the thing is that tech, like that Valjoux 7750 is over 50 years old at this point. So I kind of think we need to move on from it, maybe is what I'm saying. But again, my bitterness is pretty much solely on the rotor, not about the rest of them. That it's a simple working, like the buttons don't feel great, all of that. I expected that at the price point. I didn't expect an annoying rotor. So yes, Tuna, the helicopter of watches. I mean, that Hamilton, we'll take a look at some photos here in a little bit. But that Hamilton, if I did the same motion like this, it would feel like it go. Maybe if it wasn't strapped on, it would fly away. We don't know. I never dared test it because I didn't want to break it, but I did wonder about that. Frank says, I've heard JLC movements are noisy. Again, I don't know the answer to that one. I own one JLC. It's a manual wind reverso, so there's no rotor. And the winding of it is quiet. But again, it's a hand wound. So I don't think that's at all where you were. You're probably thinking of something along the lines of the Polaris or something. And I've actually never handled a Polaris. I went in to our JLC dealer and asked about one, and they actually didn't have any in stock. I remember because they offered to go through and ship it. Like they're a regional chain. They have like 2 or 3 stores in the Kansas City area. So they offered they had one in their whole network, and they were like, we'll get it for you. And I'm like, I'm not here to buy it. I was there looking at something else. I was like, I just wanted to, try it on and see what the big deal was. And they're like, well, we'll get it to you. We could get it here by tomorrow and you can come back. And I'm like, I don't want to come back. And they're like, what if we get it here later today? I'm like, I'm not buying the Polaris you've had sitting in inventory for 4 years. I was just mildly curious. Let's move on. And maybe it's because it has a helicopter rotor. I don't know, that they've not been able to unload that thing. Tuna notes, at a much lower price point, but Swatch System 51 is noisy as hell. Okay, I still haven't handled a Swatch 51. I remember when I first saw the System 51, read about it, because of course it's been out for quite a while. I kind of thought about getting one, not the Blancpain, but like before that, one of their more affordable System 51s, because that it's entirely machine assembled is kind of neat, but a throwaway mechanical movement is almost antithetical to the whole reason why a lot of us like mechanical movements, which I admit in and of itself is amusing, because what do most watchmakers do when like you take in your Hamilton field, khaki field, they're just swapping that movement. They're not repairing it. I mean, an independent watchmaker might repair it, but you send it to Swatch, they're just going to drop in a new movement because they're so cheap. Now, maybe they recycle the parts, though. So we'll tell ourselves that. They don't end up in the bottom of the ocean. So that would be our hope. T, I don't know how to say your handle. T looks T. That's what I'll say. T looks T. Welcome to livestream, by the way, T looks T. Who are your favorite gray market dealers? Thoughts on WatchMax? I don't believe I've never purchased through WatchMax. I've looked at their site a few times. I don't know a lot of gray market. Now, by gray market, I'm going to interpret that as you mean true gray market, like they're buying surplus AD stock, new in box, and selling it without manufacturer warranty. In which case, I've only bought through one. I'm perfectly comfortable buying through them, and that's Joma Shop. So I've never had any issues with Joma Shop. The one thing and the pricing often is, especially in production models, is often very competitive with secondhand pricing. So in a lot of instances, you either will save more money, setting negotiations aside, versus what a dealer might charge you secondhand, or it'll be within maybe a couple $100 on a luxury piece. And so you might just, I scratch up like all my watches, but you might be like, I'd rather just start with a watch that's totally virgin metal and put my own scratches in it. And for $250 on a watch that's like $5,000, I would do that. I would go ahead at that point and probably say yes. If I'm going to save $1,000 by taking a couple scratches into it, then I usually go ahead and I take the secondhand watch. So Joma Shop's the only true gray market that I'm familiar with. If you mean what some people will call gray market, but they're really just secondhand dealers, then they mostly just buy used, like they're not buying from the 80s, they're buying secondhand stock. I've bought through Watchbox, Watchfinder, Bob's Watches, and David SW, and all of those were perfectly good experiences, and they're all reputable. So those are the four I would recommend as secondhand dealers. And they all have decent-sized inventories, too. So I've done multiple transactions with David SW and with Watchbox, and Bob's and Watchfinder were one watch purchases from the both of them. So anyway, hope that helps with some context. Speaking of context, let us jump to my second pet peeve. And we mentioned Seiko. One of you, Tuna, you mentioned Seiko and their crappy QC. This is not a QC issue out of Seiko. I could judge them for it. However, I've only owned one Seiko, and my bezel was aligned at the 12 o'clock. So I don't have a complaint there. What I do have a complaint about is the pin and collar system. Why are we still using it? I hate the pin and collar system. I hate it. I don't care how secure it is. I don't care how cheap it is. If you want to do something cheap and you can't afford screws, or that's just what's necessary to keep the watch under $300 or whatever, do cotter pins. Like Orient's bracelets, they do the cotter pin method. The cotter pin, if you're not familiar with it, and they probably have some other terms for it, like it's not just called the cotter pin, but that's what I always think of it as. That's the one where one of the ends is flanged. You hammer it out just like a pin and collar, and it goes in one way because one part is tensioned, and it pushes out against the link. Super easy to remove, super easy to install. Not as cool as screws, but they work great. The whole pin and collar system, where you have the pin and you've got to line up the collars and they tap the pin into the collars, and when you take them out of the watch, the pin comes out of the watch, the collars come out of the watch. It's awful. It's awful. Maybe that was the best we understood at one point, but I've gotten to the point where I might just refuse to buy watches that come with pin and collar. I have to hedge because honestly, when I research a watch, I don't usually think to look to see what its security system is. Now, I could pet peeve a lot of secure systems because there are screw models that I hate as well. So let me go ahead and transition this one. I've started with pin and collar because I just think there's no honest to good reason to keep using it when you can do a cotter pin. It's one piece. It doesn't require threading, so it's simple to construct, and very cheap watches use cotter pins. So that's why I'm pointing out the pin and collar system specifically. However, screw systems are not all created equal either. I am a big believer in the standard one screw long through the link with threads on the end. That's the screw link system that I like. I don't like Grand Seiko's little cute, let's put a pin in, like the pin and cotter system where there's like this, sorry, the images are, Amazon not the best place to use, but where you have like a pin like this, and then instead of these cotter pins, or the collars, I should say, that hold the pins in, the pin itself is hollow, and there are screws that are about half the length of one of these collars, and they screw into both ends. That's how my Grand Seiko bracelet was. Absolutely awful. Little itty bitty screws. I mean, we're talking watchmaker size screws, very like movement size. They're very small, easy to lose, hard to balance to put back into the link. So that's one screw model that I know Grand Seiko uses, and it's awful, but it's not as bad as the approach that Zenith uses, which again, it's kind of like this as a screw. You have a screw head on one end though in the pin, and then it goes down to the end, and the end is hollow, and then you have the little baby one like Grand Seiko does that goes into the other end. The reason why that's even worse is because it's threaded into itself almost like a pipe. If you've ever worked with like water pipes and you need 2 wrenches to tighten them, you need 2 screwdrivers for the Zenith bracelet system, at least the modern one. That's like in the Chronomaster original, and I assume in the Chronomaster Sport. I don't keep 2 watch screwdrivers of the same size. When I sized my Chronomaster original, I tore up the heads of multiple screws. It took me over 2 hours to size that bracelet because getting the things open was bad enough. And then you had to try and tighten them back together. I had a similar size screwdriver I finally found and made it work. They sell a device. You shouldn't need a special device to change bracelet links. I'm very judgmental on bracelet link changing, even though you usually as an owner only go through it one time in your life per watch. There are bad models. Pin and collar, though, is the one I'm calling out specifically here as a pet peeve because it's so affordable. So you see it a lot. And I think I'm being perfectly generous saying you don't need to go to a true screw, single screw link system. Just use a cotter pin. Use a cotter pin. Everyone's got, if you have the tools to do pin and collar, you can do a cotter pin. So there's an answer. There's a fix to this. So this isn't even juicier pet peeve than my Valjoux 7750 H31 nonsense. This one could be fixed today, but people don't do it. We still get stuck with the stupid pin and collar system. So I don't think I have any new chats to catch up on. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right to my third pet peeve. I'm going to think this one's going to resonate with a lot of you who are watching live or perhaps watching the recording. Thick watches. I hate me some thick watches. Now, sometimes we have to make a watch that's thick, right? I mean, it's baby's first dive watch method of making a watch go more depth, right? And I mean that with the full on judgment that I wield with that. We've seen it out of Omega. We've seen it out of Rolex. Hey, look, we want to set a new record. How are we going to do it? Well, let's just add some thickness. We'll just add some thickness. At least with a dive watch, you go in knowing that. This is a side shot of that Hamilton I owned that the model has the H31 in it. So this is, you probably are like, wow, that looks pretty thick. How thick is that? This is 16 millimeters. This is thinner than some of the new stuff coming out of Longines. So this isn't even the thickest stuff like when it comes to chronographs. But so this was the model I had. There's a big long number for it. But see, dial-wise, date went, well, controversial 430 date window. That's not a pet peeve of mine, so we won't be going into that. I actually am okay with 430 date windows. That's not color matched. Again, it was a more affordable watch. But you see all this nice, clean, simple dial, great lume, by the way, on these models, should you be interested in it. And while they retailed close to $2,000, in reality, you could often find these unworn or slightly worn for under $1,000. So quite approachable. Looked pretty wearable to me. Again, I was new to collecting. I didn't understand thickness. I didn't even think to read about thickness. But you see, 47 millimeter lug to lug, quite wearable. 41 millimeter diameter watch, quite wearable. 22 millimeter lugs, great for strap swapping. 16 millimeters to the top of the crystal, which is what matters because that determines what you're going to be able to slide under a cuff and all the rest of it. So this just was with the chronograph, with the movement and everything else. It was, I have a video. I don't think I've made it private, but in my early days when I was still, I started this channel before I knew very much about anything about watches. I used this as part of my own learning experience. And one of the things that I struggled with was a phrase that didn't make any sense to me. It's called top heavy. I didn't know how a watch could be top heavy. It's like, of course the watch is heavy on top of the wrist. It's where the watch is. But top heavy to me is it feels imbalanced. Like the watch doesn't want to stay like this. I mean, I'm all the way. Now this is a thick watch too. This is the but it's not this thick. It's not 16 millimeters thick. Now this watch has its own issues because the domed sapphire is so thick that I can't wear it with a dress shirt. I bought it knowing that. See, but it doesn't feel top heavy. Like I ideally I'd have another hole in the strap so I could get it a little tighter. But if it was tightly strapped down, it feels a part of your wrist. This doesn't. This Hamilton, maybe for someone with a bigger wrist, but when I had this on tightened down, it still felt like it wanted to be a free bird and just or a free helicopter and fly away to a happier place away from me and my judgment. So that is an issue. And I think a lot of brands, not so much Hamilton, because this really only applies to their chronographs, but I'm going to call out Longines here, has a really, really bad habit at this point of not trying to make thinner watches, but instead just being like, we'll just add layers. Let's just add layers. Let's thicken it up. And it's going to be an issue. Another brand, a brand a lot of you who are watching might very well love, a brand I do own a watch of, Omega. And this came up when we were ranking the brands last night. And when I was ranking Omega, I brought this up. And someone in the chat brought it up before I even did. Omega does not make thin watches anymore, including in their quote-unquote dress watch lines, the Constellations and the DeVilles. I have read, and I've not gone through because they have so many SKUs, but every one I have looked at least men's watches, every men's watch, what's classified as a unisex or a men's watch from Omega site, there's nothing under 10 millimeters, nothing. And this coaxial movement that they use, which I believe is when they thickened up their watches, has been in play for so long now, there is honestly no excuse, in my opinion, for a brand as prestigious and wealthy and as income generating as Omega to not have solved this. And it's a problem at this point that they, if you want to say that the Seamaster 300 is going to stay thick, I totally get it. If you want to say that the Moonwatch is going to stay thick because it's a chronograph, I get it. There's no excuse for a Constellation to be over 10 millimeters thick at this point. There's just not. If it's trying to be a sporty dress watch, it needs to be thin, maybe not super thin. I'm not asking you to be Vacheron here, or Piaget or Bulgari, but you need to do something, in my opinion. So thick watches. This is just a poster child, but there are plenty of, you know what the one thing in common with all of these are, if you didn't know, which as collectors, a lot of you probably, what brands have I really focused on? Hamilton, Longines, Omega, they're all in Swatch Group. Swatch Group is sticky thick. It's an issue. In my opinion, it's an issue. So let's catch up on chat. T asks another question. Thoughts on Bulova? I think they are killing it on their reissues. I have never owned a Bulova. I really like the aesthetic of the Bulova Hack in particular. However, I have a friend that owns a Bulova Hack, speaks very highly of it. And I think, yes, aesthetically, I think they're underrated. And if you're looking on what we would call maybe the more affordable end of the spectrum at watches, there are a couple of things I like about Bulova. One is kind of what T has pointed out. I think aesthetically, they've got some really stunning pieces. And secondly, they're a little under the radar. Like if you're talking sub $1,000 in particular, people are going to talk Seiko and Hamilton to death. A few other people like me would probably then throw in like Orient into the mix. But a lot of people don't, on first breath, throw in Bulova. And at least me as a collector, I have a lot of interest in things that kind of fly a little more under the radar, brands that aren't talked about I have a mix. I don't want to, lest I pin myself in as a hypocrite. I mean, I have a Seiko. That's a first breath watch. I have an Omega. That's a first breath watch. So, but I really respect those that are especially fairly well established brands. I'm not big into micro brands, but when you talk about things like Bulova and Zodiac and stuff that's got some pedigree to it, I just think it's interesting. So yeah, I can't give you any thoughts myself on how quality wise and stuff. I haven't heard bad things about Bulova, and I've looked at a few of their pieces because I think aesthetically they have quite a number of attractive options, but their field watches, the Hack in particular, is the one that stands out to me. Tuna says, back on the topic of thick watches. So true. Overly thick watches tend to put me off. Well, I mean, is there anyone who just you want a thick watch over a thin watch? I'd be curious if there's anyone like that. There, my head tells me there must be, but I understand the need to make a watch thick. I understand people with larger wrists want to wear larger watches, but to me, that's achieved solely through lug to lug and diameter. You don't need it to be thick. There can be such a thing as too thin. I know lots of people have mentioned going and trying on the Bulova thin Octafinissimos and that they don't wear right. They're so thin that they feel like they're going to break, or they don't balance well on the wrist because they're so flat because of the thinness and how they have to put it in the movement. So I know about things like that. But that's not the same as saying I want a thick watch. Have you ever found a watch and you were like, I love the diameter, I love the lug to lug, I love the bracelet, but it's not thick enough? I've never had that. So, and I've never heard someone tell me that that's an issue for them. But I would be curious if anyone's like that. Frank says, I wish Omega, could slim down the Aquaterra. The first generation wasn't thick. Okay, I've not handled the first generation Aquaterra, but again, the issue, I'm not sure this is Dennis speculation, but that's what the channel is. I think the issue comes entirely down to that coaxial movement. They went all in on the coaxial movement. A lot of people love the coaxial movement. It is pretty accurate, at least the one I have is. They do a lot of the meta certification and stuff. I know a lot of other people think it's overrated and that whatever it tries to prevent wear-wise is more gimmicky than anything else, that their service intervals are still shorter than Rolex, which doesn't play this coaxial thing. But I think that just putting in that movement tech, they had to thicken up all the watches. And for those not familiar, I believe the Aquaterra is only rated to be a 150 meter watch. So in theory, it shouldn't have to be very thick, right? The Seamaster 300s at 300 meters make more, you understand why a Pro Prof is going to be thick, and a 300M would be thinner, but still probably thick, because that's a pretty serious dive setting. 150 meters, I mean, we got plenty of Orients and Seikos that are 200 meters that are thinner than Omega watches. I think it's the movement, and I think they haven't bothered to try and either shrink that movement down. Well, I should say, I don't think they bothered to try and shrink the movement down, and thus there's been no purpose in trying to figure out how to, shrinking the case should be easy once they have a movement that can fit in it. But this is not a bridge they seem at all interested in crossing. And maybe that's part of the reason why they're number 3 in Swiss sale dollar revenue now. Cartier displaced them, talking about a brand that doesn't have a problem making a watch thin. Tuna notes, a thickish dress watch is simply a contradiction in terms. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can see where, 10 millimeters, 10 to 11 millimeters is still a pretty thin watch. So I don't want to act like you handle, let me not overstate it. So it's not like you grab a 39 or 40 millimeter DeVille and you're at 10 point whatever millimeters on it. And you're like, oh my God, this is so thick. I don't think that's going to be the reaction by and large, but it is noteworthy where that's going to be a watch and it retails more than the Tudor 1926, which is a sub 10 millimeter watch with an automatic, movement. I was going to say COSC certified. They don't COSC certify those. I think they used to use top grade ETA though, which basically are rated at COSC, but they don't go through the COSC certification process. They use the Solita equivalent at this point. I'm rambling a little bit. My point is, lots of other brands get sub 10 millimeters on these steel bracelet, sporty dress watches, or however you want to, the Rolex Datejust of the world. they're not true dress watches. They're not meant to be worn on alligator straps and all the rest. They sell them on steel for a reason. They have 100 meters of water resistance minimum. That's certain, though I don't know if all the DeVilles do. So yeah, it's interesting, but absolutely, I agree with Tuna that a dress watch should never be thick or even thickish. So, and Frank notes his Aquaterra is as thick as his Milgauss is. I've never handled a Milgauss, and now I guess I can't because they're discontinued until they come back. Okay, my fourth pet peeve. This one, if you watch my live streams in particular, you already know what this one is. I saved it second to last for that reason, and that is cropped hour markers. I hate cropped hour markers. Total pet peeve. There's no intrinsic reason why cropping the hour markers is wrong, but it's wrong. It's wrong to me. And so as a general rule, will I ever break this rule? That would be true hypocrisy. Maybe I will. Maybe there's something that can be done. Here's one of my favorite examples, though. This is the Breitling Premier B01 line, because I like so much about this watch. I love the color scheme in and of itself is great. Chronograph, again, really clean layout. I actually think the non-color match date window works on this type of watch. I love the Arabic hour markers in terms of their font and their size and thus their legibility. Everything about this watch would be something that I would end up putting on my list as something I would want to buy, except these two subdials end up butchering the 10, 8, 4, and especially the 2. And to me, I'm like, you could have solved this. Take these 4 markers out. Don't have the markers at all, or do like a stick indice sort of thing. So, as all pet peeves, there's almost not a logic to them. I mean, I think people understand. It's just I just don't like the cropping of it. To me, it looks jarring. That's what it comes down to. I do not mind when subdials, because I have exceptions. I do not mind when subdials crop into other subdials. So like what Zenith does with their register, I'm fine with that. I don't mind when minute tracks and second tracks get cropped. It's really just the hours. And I don't, the level of annoyance changes depending on the type of hour marker. Arabic cropping is the most offensive to me. I'm not as bothered by Roman numeral cropping, but I'm not a fan of it. I've rolled out of consideration in like watches to track. Breguet is really big about cropping one of their, especially at the 6 o'clock position. They love to crop it down. And that I've ruled out plenty of Breguets that I thought otherwise were watches I would love as dress watches just because of that. I would Langenzonen, they do that on a number of their lines. They'll crop into their Roman numerals. I don't find it as offensive. I'm not quite sure why. I think it's because everything's basically an X, a V, or an I, and they all kind of have the same general shape. Whereas with Arabic numerals, there's more asymmetry just because all the numbers look different. I'm not sure. That's just kind of where my head's at. And then the least bothersome to me is cropping of stick indices. In fact, most people don't crop them. Most watch manufacturers just shrink them. I'm okay with shrinking. I'm okay with people going in and saying, hey, we're going to get rid of the marker, or we're going to change the size. And ideally you balance that out in some way. There's an approach I'm looking up online right now. FP Jorn, so ultra high end, expensive brand. He's done something. I don't know if he's a big fan of cropping. He does it a little bit on some of his watches. So, okay. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he has the same issue. So like this, when I saw it originally from a distance, I thought it was cropped, but notice he cuts the 7, there's actually a little bit of space here. So he doesn't crop it. He got close. He cut into the sector ring or whatever we want to call it here in the interior. This is okay. Like this, it's asymmetrical. And whether or not we like the asymmetry could be debated, but that's okay. He has another watch, I don't know if it's still in production or not, where he, I think, changed. See, he didn't crop. He cut it right. He got it right to the edge, but he cropped the 11. So this one would bug me, and I'd be like, I don't think I could go for that one. Of course, I probably couldn't go for any of them because they're super duper expensive. He has a watch where I think he actually shrunk one of the numbers. It was, I don't know if it's current production, where it's like by a 7 or something, and he actually just made it teeny tiny. I think I saw it somewhere, but anyway, I don't know if it's made right now or not. But well, I guess we can look in the retrospective collections. But so it's that sort of thing. It just bugs me when we crop, like here, he's cropped the 7 and the 5. Okay, so sometimes he crops, sometimes he doesn't. Like if you're going to crop into the minute tracks, it doesn't bother me, but it bothers me with the hours. Again, it's a pet peeve. It doesn't have to have logic. It just is the way it is, which maybe I should be grateful for, because that has helped rule out plenty of watches that I might otherwise end up putting on the wish list and starting to think, maybe I could achieve it. Maybe I could achieve it. And it's better not to have to think about it. So Ken notes, and welcome to live stream, Ken. JLC Reverso has bad cropping. Some of them do. I own a JLC Reverso with Arabic numerals with no cropping. It has a small seconds at the 6 o'clock. They just left the 6 off. Perfect solution. Perfect. Or as the what Michael Fassbender says in that meme from one of the X-Men movies, perfection. So like that. T looks T. Ask about another brand. Has thoughts on glycine now? Has quality gone down now that they are owned by Invicta? Maybe someone in the chat knows. I have not handled a modern glycine myself. Everything I have read is that no, glycine gets to operate basically as its own standalone entity. That kind of like how Fossil owns Zodiac, and Fossil, other than they use Fossil's in-house movements for some of their watches, Fossil doesn't like tell Zodiac what to do design-wise. I've heard it's the same relationship between glycine and Invicta. Invicta owns glycine to make money. They did not Invictify glycine. But that's not firsthand. That's third hand that I've heard that. So I've heard they're fine. And so a perfectly legitimate thing to go ahead and consider. What isn't a legitimate thing to consider are watches that are my pet peeve. I'm joking. You can still consider them for you, but what I can't consider. The last one, how could I not? A lot of brands do this, and that is watches that you cannot tell the time on. The whole point of a watch is for it to tell the time. Yes, I get it. We collect them. Yes, I get it. They're basically men's jewelry, but they still have a function. The watch should always tell the time in a way that, for me as a pet peeve, it needs to be relatively easy to be able to read it. It can be really weird. That's okay. You want to do Star Wheels, Audemars Piguet, Mr. Jones watches. You want to do all sorts of weird ways to display the time. I'm good with all of it, but it should be able to let you tell the time. You can even get cute with it, like Meistersinger one-handed watches, and basically you're telling time in 5-minute intervals. Yeah, I get it. That's the aesthetic you're going with. But some of the stuff like Moser's really guilty about this. They do a lot of watches without any markers on them. I'll load one up. I didn't preload one, but they got plenty. So like, I get it. You want to show off your Vanta Black, but they don't do it on that. They do it on a lot of their watches, and it becomes the, like, are you sure exactly what time it is? No, but it gets to the degree that I think we start to lose sight of what we're trying to go with. So Moser does it. And we mentioned them before with cropping that can annoy me, and I really like the brand a lot. Along in Zona though, sometimes when people are doing, actually they're with the cropping. I was thinking of their Aventurine dial, but Christopher Ward, actually, there you go. They've taken the Aventurine dial, which a lot of brands like Lange has done before. They have an Aventurine dial that's actually pretty easy to read. And in fact, their first Aventurine style dial was that way, but their new C1 Moonphase is not. So let me show you a few examples here. So this is an unacceptable watch to me because there's no hours or minute markers. Yet there's a second hand. Like, dude, you guys came up with a very attractive dial other than, well, I've already judged this watch. Like, all right, another pet peeve of mine, that random add-on bonus pet peeve. If you if you feel like you've got the watchmaking chops that you're not going to put your name on the dial and you're not even going to put indices on the dial, don't cop out and put Swiss made on there. Get rid of that. Be bold. If you're gonna go in, go all in. Don't do this weird hedge where you still need to feel like you have to hide behind Swiss made to sell your watch. You're not even going to put Christopher Ward on the dial. Give me a break. Moser would not have done that. They wouldn't have put Swiss made on there. They'd stripped everything else off. In fact, they do it all. Or I should say they don't do it all the time. But this is a joke because not only are there no hour, minute, there are no markers whatsoever. This second hand is completely worthless. This second hand exists because you're buying a mechanical watch and people want to be able to show that it's mechanical by watching the stutter of the second hand, but it serves no function on this watch whatsoever. You can't easily tell the time on this watch. I don't like it. They have other adventuring watch dials that are much better than this. I talked about Moser. Kudos to them for not even putting Swiss made on it. And yeah, Vanta Black, I mean, your screen will never do it justice. It's the blackest black there is. It's incredible. But again, this watch doesn't let me tell the time. So, and they have other watches like this. So Moser does so much cool stuff. This is too out there, too avant-garde. It goes against my pet peeves too much. I can't get behind it. But my favorite example, and how could it not be, is this. This is a chronograph. This is a chronograph that you can't tell the hours on, the minutes on, the seconds on. I can't even tell you what these three sub-registers, I can't even call them sub-dials because they're not dials. These sub-registers on this dial, I don't know what any of them mean. All I can tell you is they're all pointing straight up. That's all I know. I don't know anything else about this watch because it's completely unreadable. This watch is stupid. This watch in no way should exist. And that Audemars Piguet of all brands did it is absolutely embarrassing to me. But it's just my pet peeve. Your mileage may vary. Maybe you love this watch. And if I show this watch, now they don't just have the chronograph version. The time only ones are just as bad. But anytime I show this up, I always have to show the dead woman in the lawn chair because this was their marketing photos. So you see, if you're dead, then these watches work because when you're dead, you don't tell the time. So that your watch is illegible is okay. But unless you're dead in a plastic lawn chair, I don't know why you would ever want to watch like this. And it's my favorite because the added insult to injury on all of them. I made so many different ones. They're all unreadable. All of them are unreadable. The only thing that's readable is the date version. You can actually read the date. They didn't go full emoji like Rolex did. That's the only saving grace to any of these is, okay, you can buy a watch that can actually tell the date, which of course is something that you can readily find in, you could get a Voss stock mechanical watch for like under $50 new that would be able to tell you the date. But it's the pricing on these things is an absolute abomination. This is my second favorite photo because who doesn't want to hang their 18 karat gold watch on a ring with a bunch of keys bumping up against it? Maybe this is a net and not a chain. Originally, when I saw this, I thought it was a chain link fence. I feel bad about talking about this watch again because I made fun of it so much when it came out. But at what their cheapest one is 61,000 Swiss francs. It's even more in dollars. So just as a conversion, you want to do a 1-to-1, it's actually going to be more, but you want to pretend it's $61,000, you can, because it's worse than that. 75,000, 92,000, absolute joke. And it's all down to the fact that you can't read these. You can read, they made sure you could read Audemars Piguet on the dial, but you can't read anything else. And look at this. It's a chronograph, folks. I guess, I don't even know if these things move. It's got buttons. But is it like one of those clone watches where they're fake? I don't know. If you want to super chat me enough, 61,000. No, actually don't. I was going to say, if you want to send me enough money to buy one, I'll buy one and review it, but I won't. Don't send me that money. I won't spend it on this. I can't, because this would encourage them. We can't do that, guys. We can't. We just have to not know about this. We can never truly know about this watch. That is an example, a prime case in point about bad dial design. You might like it visually, like as a piece of art, but here's the thing for me, again, back to my pet peeve. Watches cannot just be art for art's sake. They must maintain their function or else they are no longer a watch. And I think some of these, even though they tell the time, like they can keep track of the time internally, if they can't properly convey it externally, I can't consider them. Be it an affordable brand like Christopher Ward, all the way up to an ultra luxe expensive brand like Audemars Piguet. But those are the 5 pet peeves that I wanted to focus on, with the special bonus pet peeve that I threw in there as a quasi 6th. But Tuna says, call me a peasant, but I quite like the Movado Museum. Hey, I'm not going to call you a peasant. These are my pet peeves. I don't expect you to have, I don't expect anyone watching to have any of these pet peeves. These are all mine. The only one that, and you don't have to have my pet peeve, never buy this watch. I forbid it. That's like, I don't have any control over anyone watching, nor should I. I have no place to tell anyone what to do. But every rule has an exception. And my exception is I forbid this watch to be bought. Any in this line, I forbid it. So, I mean, you know, you'll have to weigh that. That may weigh very heavily on your conscience, because this is an abomination, and not just because it's not readable. It's got a lot of things wrong with it. So you can't buy it. It's just not allowed. I won't allow it. So that's the one rule. But I mean, you know, if you like the Vanta Black, there are going to be plenty of people that are going to get into this, and they're cool with it because they're like, well, no, you can tell the time well enough with where the hands are. I get that. It's too much of a pet peeve for me to be able to do it. They had a watch that I loved. I think it was in their Pioneer line. Maybe not. I think all the Pioneers actually have the markers. Must have been an Endeavor. That I like the color and everything about it. This Endeavor Center of Seconds. Oh, I love so much about this watch, but without the markers, I'm just like, I just can't. The color's awesome. It looks good in the white gold, but I mean, the second hand doesn't serve any purpose again, other than showing you that the watch is mechanical, which whatever. I mean, I just can't. I can't. It's a dentist thing. I can't. And the same with this. Like, if I were wanting an adventuring dial, I'm not really into adventuring dials in general. They're not a pet peeve. They just don't click for me. But like, if I was here and I was like, all right, I want an adventuring, I wouldn't be able to get behind this with Christopher Ward. However, they have, I think it's one of their best sellers. I'm just going to click here. They have other ones that achieve that, like this. See, this is the adventuring dial with markers. Now, I might like a little bit better on a strap than the bracelet or something, but and I like the handset better on the new one. But this works for me, like, because you can tell the time on it. So there are exceptions. Well, but it's not an exception to my pet peeve. Like, it's just I want markers on it. I want first and foremost, I like to glance and know. I don't want to hunt for the time. It's one of the things with the Mr. Jones watches. Totally get it with them. They make it quite readily able to read. But I really only wear my Mr. Jones watches as novelty watches because they're themed around like arcading and pinball, my other hobbies. So I only wear them for those purposes because it's just a little too difficult to tell the time. I've tried to wear them like in low light situations and stuff, and the time just takes up. Again, they have different watches, so your mileage varies depending on the Mr. Jones watch you get. But they're just not readable enough for me to use them as everyday watches, even though they're quite robust. And so I would if they were easier for my eyes to read. But again, that's all just my pet peeve, just all what it ties into. So, Tuna, that you like the Movado. I know people with Movados. The museum watch is iconic, really. We could maybe complain, why doesn't Movado move on or do something more than that? But that's a collector judgment thing. As a watch, they're very popular for a reason. A lot of people really like that super clean aesthetic. I don't. Koji writes, it's watches like that which makes me fine with the panel putting AP in the okay category. Okay, so Koji's referring back to our panel we did last night where we rated brands and we did a 4-tier scale because YouTube got to vote, but AP ended up as a 2, an okay. We had poor, okay, good, and great. Vacheron, Patek, Lange, Rolex, Casio for that matter, they were all great, but I guess this is my okay finger as I'm counting. I have to do it. I have to have my indices. These are my indices. but AP only ended up in okay. Now, we didn't actually call out, actually, I think I did. I called out that stupid watch. I couldn't remember the name of it because its name is not worthy of remembrance. But AP got judged pretty harshly because they leaned so hard on the Royal Oak. Vacheron isn't only the overseas. Patek is not only the Nautilus, but AP is only the Royal Oak. So, and hey, I mean, that's true for this example we did here. All this weird fashion watchy stuff. This screams code 1159, but code 1159 would have meant it wouldn't sell at all. Maybe they sell these to people who are desperate to try and get the Royal Oak they actually want. One of the nice ones that you can actually read. And so this is like your starter Royal Oak to get on the list. I don't know. I hear the AP boutiques play a lot again. Like if you thought the games out of Rolex were frustrating, the AP games are really bad because they like sell it all direct at this point through boutiques. They don't have independent dealers. So I haven't confirmed that, but that's what I recall some people mentioning. Hey, actually, I think that's what Ken's getting at here. Royal Oaks really need to trade under retail. Okay, he's talking about under retail price. There was a time where like offshores and stuff, you could get those less than retail. But Koji notes, once AP brings back the Jules Audemars or the Edward Piguet line of watches, I'll take them seriously again. I have looked online at some of the old Jules Audemars because there's a lot of the design language. Like the thing that surprised me when I looked at their current catalog, and this was maybe last year, like they don't have a Calatrava wannabe anymore. Like everyone has a Calatrava wannabe, but not AP. Like in terms of the dress watch line. I mean, Rolex's 1908 is just another iteration on the Calatrava. So for those that don't know, the Patek Philippe Calatrava, iconic, like Great Depression era watch that saved the company, basically at the time. That's when the Stern family kind of went in and bought them. And I'll show you one here. That's why you hear the typing in the background. So Patek does a lot with the Calatrava. Now these are a lot of people buy Calatravas and then they sell for less used because people are using them to get permission to get Nautilus, Grand Complications, all the rest of it. So, but it's a very attractive watch design. So this is a Calatrava. So lots of brands have something that looks like this. Longa has their Saxonia. It looks like this. Yeah, the hand shapes are different. Yeah, the indices are different. It's the same basic watch though. The Patrimonies out of Vacheron, that's their Calatrava clone. AP used to do that in the Jules Audemars line, but they don't have anything like that anymore. There's nothing in the code 1159 last I looked that is a Calatrava competitor. The 1908 is a Calatrava competitor. And there's a reason why most of these brands that want to do dress watches have a Calatrava competitor because it's a super clean. Now, sometimes they mix it up. Calatravas come with small seconds. So that's why you'll see versions like the 1908, which will come in and have the small seconds iteration on it. So they're different flavors, but you see, it's the same basic, simple, clean, attractive look. They even got the coin edging here going on. I mean, the fluting in the case of Rolex. So yeah, anyway, it's not a pet peeve. I can't bring it to pet peeve level that Audemars Piguet decided not to have their version of a Calatrava anymore. But I just thought it was weird because it's like a timeless design. And if you want to still do dress watches and people want to get into dress watches, the simple, clean, non-complicated, easy to read watch just resonates. And there are plenty of people that don't want to pay. I mean, yeah, Audemars was going to price theirs around the Calatrava price point. And yes, their version would sell for less used than the Calatrava would. But there have been plenty of people that like the Calatrava and, setting money aside, don't like their choice for the indices or don't like their choice for the hands and would prefer what AP would do. If you've never looked, go and do a search for the Jules Audemars line on Chrono 24 and take a look. It's their own design language, and it is unfortunate, I think, that they don't do it anymore. But the 1159, I guess, was their thought of the way they were going to get back into, which I actually don't hate even the original first gen 1159s, but to a lot of people, they look very fashion watchy. And for the prices they sell for, it's a bit much for basically a non-established model line. But Tuna says that AP looks like something from Michael Kors. And Tuna notes that being the Calatrava is a real Patek for me, to me. So yeah, no, I love the Calatrava a lot about it, but I like the Patrimonies too. I just like that. That's a good, nice format. Parmigiani, they're 1950s. Is that called the 1950, 1952 something? They got a watch that's in that again. And that's Parmigiani. That's not a brand. That's not a first or second breath brand. It's a very respected brand, but they've got a watch like that. I mean, it's your go-to. If you're gonna, I'm not saying copy the Calatrava, but if you're gonna have a dress watch line, have something that competes with it. Maybe that could be minor pet peeve number 7. If you're a watch manufacturer that makes dress watches, have something that's competition for the Calatrava. I mean, even Seiko has some stuff. Or they have some stuff that was at one point the competition with the Tank, which actually looked really good and was much more affordable, of course. But anyway, that is it. We lasted an hour. I'm surprised, but those markerless AP Royal Oaks just pissed me off. So I knew that one was going to be a little bit of a rant for me. I can't help it. But anyway, thank you so much for those of you who are able to tune in live. I appreciate it. Feel free to leave comments about the video. Or what I'd actually like to know is, what are your pet peeves? Stuff I didn't mention that irks you, like band materials, metals of the cases, certain shapes. Like you just can't get into Tonneau's barrels. Wronged you as a child, and barrel shapes are forever no longer going to be on your wrist. Things of that nature. And other than that, I hope all of you have a really good end to the rest of your holiday weekend if you're in the US for Thanksgiving. And otherwise, I will plan to talk to you all in a week. So take care, everybody. See you on the next one.